So hopefully this is the last lecture video about waste, but now we're going to be, previously I talked about the national priorities list, right, and hazardous substances. So we're going to be talking about types of hazardous waste. So there are three main, actually. Corrosiveness is actually a type of reactivity in this case. So what happens is there's actually multiple ways that you can actually, in this case, predict basically the hazard of the actual waste. Okay, so what are the actual effects of specific waste? And we already talked about non-hazardous and hazardous waste before, so now we're talking primarily about hazardous waste. Toxicity, obviously. Okay, so that means to say there are substances that can actually kill a living system. Now, it doesn't have to be humans. It could also be toxic to plants. It could be toxic to foul. Okay, ignitability, obviously, does it react quite easily? And then obviously reactivity. Okay, does it react with water? Does it react with air? So that's actually reactivity. Okay, the other last thing is corrosiveness, and again, corrosiveness is actually a form of reactivity if you want to think about this. Is obviously because if it's corrosive to metal container, you cannot put this hazardous waste in this case in a metal container. Okay, acids. Okay, you cannot put acids in this case in metal containers. It'll just eat through stuff, and obviously it's very reactive with water. Okay, so you actually don't want to do that. So these are the way that we classify hazardous waste. Now the main take home here, however, is we actually have under the Resource Conservation Recovery Act, it's quite interestingly that we have this waste that we can actually classify hazardous waste, but there are exceptions to the rule, right? Exceptions. Radioactive waste is an exception, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, don't ask me how that gets there. Okay, so like the waste fuel, the waste plutonium rods. Actually, they're not no longer plutonium, but the waste from nuclear power plants. Okay, is not considered non-hazardous waste. Household waste. So anything that you throw from your house, hypothetically speaking, is considered non-hazardous waste, and there's a reason why that is. Okay, so we're gonna talk about that. Maybe I should talk about it now. And the reason why that is because there's also this funny quota. As long as it doesn't matter how hazardous substance is. Okay, so it could be something poisonous. Okay, but as long as it is less, that you manufacture less than 100 kilograms a month, or 220 pounds, it's not considered hazardous. Isn't that interesting? Okay, mining waste is considered non-hazardous waste. Oil and gas drilling waste, just figure out who lobbied quite hard for this. Okay, and then of course liquids containing organic hydrocarbons. So organic hydrocarbons, you probably heard about this, polycyclic biphenyls. Okay, so pH polyaromatic hydrocarbons. Okay, all of those things are actually poisonous to humans. Okay, but not considered in hazardous waste. Okay, there are other legislation out there that actually probably or already does cover these things, and it's not RCRA. Okay, cement kiln dust, obviously that is not. So the dust that actually is manufactured in this case cement plants is actually not considered hazardous. Obviously the reason why I put this in the list is because there has been histories of actually employees contracting lung cancer and so on and so forth when they actually work in those kind of environments. Okay, so again, a few funny exceptions to the rule here, just to show you that sometimes our laws do not make sense. All right, but I digress. So how do we deal with hazardous waste? So like radioactive waste or any other thing that we consider hazardous waste, obviously you want to create less, right? You want to always create. Obviously this is going back to the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle. Okay, in this case, disposal should be the last. Okay, the last option here. Now, if whatever waste you use, okay, there's a lot of ways that you can actually make them. In this case, less hazardous. Land treatment. Land treatment is basically in this case sewer treatment. That's actually land treatment. So anything that you do with it, like treating it with chemicals, that's called land treatment. Burning it. Okay, makes it less hazardous. That's what we think. Obviously, there are some hazardous substances in which incineration is not. In this case, it's not considered. This is primarily used, if I tell you right now, for biological hazards, right? So anything that can kill you that are biological, you can actually incinerate it and you kill it. Thermal treatment. Thermal treatment is just basically heating but short of burning. Obviously, treating it with biological treatment, chemical and physiological, and actually this is related to land and chemical, physical and biological treatment. And then obviously the last thing is dump it. So obviously if you dump it, it becomes diluted, so it becomes less hazardous because they be basically spread in a huge area. Okay. However, if you so you're still gonna have some leftover hazardous waste at the point, then you put it in perpetual storage. Perpetual means forever storage, right? So you put them in waste piles, underground injections. Okay, again, this is obviously in your PowerPoint slides. So there's a lot of ways that you could do this. Salt formations, and the reason why they're so good, salt formation are so good, is because salt basically makes a lot of this hazardous waste non-reactive, right? Because salt, like sodium chloride, is non-reactive. The other thing is you could actually just throw it in the desert. This is the arid region and unsaturated zone. Okay. The worst way that you could actually put in perpetual storage is actually surface impoundment. So things that are actually on the surface, obviously, like you can actually have like an open pit. Okay, surface impoundments. And I'm just gonna like go a little bit, and I'm just gonna tell you guys about a funny thing about radioactive waste. So as you know, we as a country have tested a lot of nuclear weapons, right? From the like in this case from Los Alamos, okay, from the first atomic bomb, as well as a lot of hydrogen bombs that we actually detonated in this case in the Pacific Islands. The Pacific Islands, we're talking about Micronesia, Marshall Islands, primarily speaking, right? What we've done is we actually have taken a few islands, in like actually in the Marshall Islands, okay? And what we've actually have done is we've actually like basically also brought there the actual radioactive materials from as a byproduct from the atomic explosions that we have created in the United States. And what we've done is we've actually capped it with this huge concrete dome. You guys can actually read this and like you can actually Google this. And obviously right now what's going on with that is because of rising seawater. What's looking right now is it looks like that impoundment, that concrete slab that goes on top of this huge material of radioactive byproducts of our testing is probably going to be compromised eventually. There are already cracks, okay? And obviously it's because of the rising seawater. So we don't know how long that's gonna last, okay? But just to tell you, like some of the effects of hazardous waste, even though radioactive waste is not considered non-hazardous, okay? It's so basically that definition is just through RCRA, but obviously radioactive waste is still hazardous waste. It still can kill you. All right, so that's one way that you can do this. Now, obviously, like anything in perpetual storage can leak, can actually contaminate, like in this case, the land, the soil. It can actually contaminate water, which is probably one of the most important things. It can obviously kill the local flora and fauna, so it can kill local plants, so on and so forth. And obviously the other thing is it can, if there's any living humans around it, obviously it can actually obviously hurt those people as well, no matter where it is, whether that's in the Marshall Islands or okay in the middle of the Mojave Desert. Okay, so that's how we deal with hazardous waste. There's other ways that we can actually detoxify, remove waste, and physical methods. Okay, there's a lot of methods here. Physical methods is basically just like dig it up and basically just remove the stuff. Okay, the hazardous waste. That's one way. Chemical methods. Chemical methods is if you actually like, let's say there's a chemical that reacts with another chemical, then you mix them together. And what happens is that reaction then neutralizes the previously hazardous waste. So that's actually a chemical method. Bioremediation is actually bacteria or microorganism based. So you actually, we actually do this with a lot of sewage. Okay, so you actually throw some amazing like bacteria. Okay, and actually there are actually some bacteria that can actually neutralize uranium. Okay, so they can actually take radioactive metals inside them and actually neutralize them at the same time. So that's quite interesting. Phytoremediation, the only difference between bio and phyto is plant-based. Okay, so you use plants, okay, to actually suck up the actual waste in an area. Obviously, then the plants become contaminated, and no one should be able to actually treat, like work with those things. Okay, so that's phyto means plant, and plasma incineration is always the surefire way that we treat with hazardous waste. We just burn it. Obviously, again, as I said before, there are some waste that we cannot incinerate. Okay, so that's a few techniques that we have been doing so far. All right. Now we're flipping into like the like in this case, national priorities list. Okay, again, remember that Superfund sites are sites that actually are in this case eligible for external funding from the federal government. And there are two areas in our actually in our region: Kohler Company landfill. Okay, so again, anything above 28.5 is actually considered highly contaminated site, and which means to say that you can get external funding. So 0 to 100 systems. So as you can see, the Kohler Company landfill, okay, has a highly hazardous. Okay, the good thing about this Kohler Company landfill is the Kohler Company is obviously in this case basically paying for most. Okay, but obviously some of that, I'm sorry about that, ladies and gentlemen, but obviously there's going to be some funding from the federal government. Okay. Sheboygan River and Harbor. This is actually going on right now. In fact, we are currently at some of the terminal phases of cleanup already. The Sheboygan River and Harbor, the main industry that was the culprit, according to the federal government, of contamination for the Sheboygan River and Harbor is actually the Tecumseh Industries. And the Tecumseh Industries were actually one of the big payers of the Sheboygan River and Harbor, in this case, cleanup. Obviously, they went bankrupt, okay, and so what happens is, again, federal, okay, taxpayers have been shouldering a lot of the burden for this one, okay. But as you can see, if you've been down to downtown Sheboygan right now, the Sheboygan River and Harbor, there's a renaissance going on in that area. So, okay, so again, Superfund sites in our area, okay. Which brings us to a few other things, and I really find this quite interesting. I don't know if you know this, but we as a country uses the most pesticides. And I don't know if you know this, if you look at this list, okay, aside from a couple of things that are unintentionally produced during combustion meaning in this case, the burning of fossil fuels, okay, are this, okay, what happens is a bunch of this highly hazardous chemicals, which are banned, and actually there are a few things that are actually not here, even in this list, are banned all over the world, okay, except where? In the United States. Why? Well, DDT is banned all over the world now, but some of this we still use. Why? Because, you know, we need to control, in this case, pests that might compromise our harvest, our crops. Okay, and you know, farmers obviously need to survive, especially in this era in which small farms are actually declining. They need all the help they can get. But the key here is we need to find alternative ways to actually make sure that our crops actually go to harvest. Okay, the weather right now is not helping at all, so no amount of pesticide is going to help you when it's wet. You know, like in this current season. Okay, but quite interestingly, the other thing is one of the funny other things is the active ingredient Roundup. I know there's a big debate about is it really hazardous, blah blah blah, so on and so forth. But I'll tell you something fine. The European Union and Russia has banned glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Monsanto's Roundup. We still use it, obviously. In fact, I bet you that some of us, okay, not me, but some of us will probably have Roundup in our garden because we want some very, very cool looking gardens. Okay, I don't know, FYI, ladies and gentlemen, if you have a beautiful lawn, kudos to you, but having a great lawn, ladies and gentlemen, is so much work. You have to mow, you have to trim, you have to weed whack, right? Make your front yard and backyard, you know, in this case, like in this case, a prairie. Obviously, unless you're in a subdivision in which the rules apply. But anyway, I digress. Which brings us to the last tenet about hazardous waste, which is called the precautionary principle. Just because it's a great idea doesn't mean that we should do it. That's basically what the precautionary principle is, right? So anytime we create a substance, anytime we create a process, we should always be looking at what are the possible negative side effects of our actions, okay? Now, obviously, we cannot be bogged down by paralysis just by thinking all the bad things that could happen. But even if we implement something that provide like maybe 10, 20 years down the road, we figure out it's actually hazardous, we need to have a plan for it. We cannot do something and not have a plan for it. And lately, that has been the way that we've been dealing with waste in the world. Okay? And that should be it.